Tonight I'm going to tie a carp fly that I've been using pretty much for the past year, almost exclusively, and I call it the Crawfish Etouffee. I'm going to start my thread about a hook eye's length on the back of the shank of the hook, and this hook is a Fulling Mill 2505 Bonio carp. It's super sticky, and it's very stout, perfect for the carp around here in the hill country. Once I get my thread started, I'm going to take some brass eyes in size small. And I'm going to set these back. I'm going to tie them in just about that hook eye's length away from the eye of the hook. So when you look at it from the side, the leading edge of the eyes should line up with the back end of that hook eye. And that's my way of measuring. I want to make sure these are locked in pretty good. Normally I might add a drop of super glue on these thread wraps to help keep those eyes in place, but I don't have the right super glue with me, so we're going to go without, which is okay. Just want to make sure it's locked in good so they don't spin too much. And if you're tying these without super glue and you fish them and they do spin a little bit, that's okay. You can always spin them back. Now I'm going to bring my thread back just past the bend of the hook, or just into the bend of the hook, where it starts to kind of curve up. And I'm going to take some dubbing. And we're gonna build a dubbing ball right there. And that's going to help splay our claws. I'm just going to keep wrapping over itself to build up that ball, and I'm going to bring the thread behind the ball. Now, I'm going to use some standard sized chenille to make our claws. And usually what I'll do, get it off of the hook card, or the card there. Take about 2 inches of it, double it over, fold it in half, and I'll tie them in. Here in a minute, I'm going to burn the tips of these chenille pieces. And on my personal flies, what I'll do is I'll actually dip the burnt ends into some fabric puffy paint to give it a little bit of a hot spot. But for sake of the video, I'm not going to do that today because it takes a little while to dry. So once I have those tied in, I'm going to measure these back to be just longer than the shank of the hook. I'm going to take a lighter. I'm going to try to show you without burning everything down. Just barely touch that chenille to give it a point. Same thing on the other side. And that point is what I would normally dip into the puffy paint, but we're going to skip that today. Now what I'll do, oops, there it is, bink, bink, bink. I'm going to break my thread. I'm going to make a dubbing loop just behind where we tied in that chenille. And I'll bring my thread back to the eyes to get it out of my way. Take my dubbing loop spinner, let that dangle, and do a couple half hitches so I can keep this fly from unraveling as I'm wrapping. Now I'm going to take some Cohen's Carp Dub in Blaze Orange. I'm going to build a dubbing loop. This carp dub, if you've never used it before, it's full of tiny little rubber legs. And since we're tying a crawfish pattern, those rubber legs can look like antenna legs, all sorts of stuff. Do one more clump. Usually about 3 clumps of this dubbing gets the job done. Take it, and I'm going to hold the dubbing loop onto my finger, and I'm going to start twisting this tool Get my pinchers out of the way. I'm going to spin it. We're going to get a nice hairy cord here, and I'm going to actually use gun cleaning brushes. And I'm going to I'm not brushing necessarily, I'm just kind of tapping and pulling off to keep from breaking my thread. Because I think I'm using 70, which is really lightweight and easy to break. But I want it to be just hairy, so when I start wrapping this forward, it acts kind of like a hackle. So once I get to the dubbing, I'm going to start brushing everything forward. Just keep wrapping until we get, again, I'm going to use that measurement, about a hook eye's length from our dumbbells. Maybe just a little bit further. I made my dubbing loop a little long. Waste some material. That's okay. That happens. Fly tying. Couple wraps to capture. Cut it off right at the hook. Clean up anything. Or right at the shank. Clean up anything that's hanging there. I capture that butt just to make sure. Now I'll take my brush. I'm going to brush our dubbing out. You can go all sorts of different directions. That fibers get trapped as you wrap it, so you want to untrap as many as you can. Can't get them all. That's okay. So now what I'll do, once I get it fairly brushed out, I'm going to go in and trim some of these longer materials. You can take your hook out of the vise here. It makes it a little bit easier. I'm choosing to leave it in the vise today, and the reason I'm doing this is I don't want these dubbing fibers to suffocate and hide my pinchers. I want them to stick out a little bit, especially if you put the fabric paint on there. I want them to stick out a little bit. Okay, now we'll take some soft hackle. We're going to find some feather fibers, or some feathers with fibers that extend from the back end of the dumbbells just past the bend of the hook. And I want 2 of them. The reason I'm pulling 2 of them is because these hinge saddles, or these soft hackle patches, have pretty small feathers, and we need more than what they can offer. So we'll grab 2. And I'll put them together. Grab the tips of the feathers and peel some fibers away to expose the stem. And I'll tie those in with the convex side toward the bend of the hook. Lock some wraps in there to lock it in. I'm going to try to get in there and trim off the excess. Now I'm going to do it with my hands. Some people will use hackle pliers. It's really up to you, however you're comfortable wrapping these feathers. I'm going to do my best to fold the feather fibers forward as best as you can. But if you trap some, that's okay, because we're going to put some dubbing to push everything back. So I ended up with about 3 turns of these feathers. I'm going to capture behind the eyes. You want to try not to trap any fibers with your thread, but I know I've said this a lot, but if you do, that's okay. So we're going to use our brush to brush everything forward, and then we're going to force everything down with our dubbing here in a second. Take my fingers and comb it all back. Put some thread wraps over those fibers. I'm going to get some dubbing. And this is super bright dubbing. And you could skip this part if you wanted to, but I like to cover up the thread wraps holding the dumbbells on, so that's what we're going to do. I'm just using a color to match the fly, but you could put a hot spot on here with it. You could match the color. You can darken it to hide those dumbbell eyes a little bit. It's really a personal preference. I'm going to check. Make sure I got my thread wraps all covered up. The way I'm wrapping this dubbing to cover the thread wraps is just like we tied in the eyes, with X wraps or the figure eights. Once I have the dubbing on there. Now my carp flies, depending on the thread I'm using, if I'm using a bright thread, I might build a big head here, big thread head to have that hot spot. But I'm not. I decided to go with brown today, so I'll build a little bit of a head. Quick whip finish. Maybe 2. I'm very selective where my wraps end up on these whip finishes. I don't think it matters too much. I'm just trying to stay from getting too close to that hook eye. Then we trim our thread. Give it a good once over. And there it is. Crawfish etouffee.